I'm being facetious. Because, if a Texas team wins a championship, I get my furniture for free from gallery. So y'all need to start praying that happens, because UT let me down last week.
They're trying to make us hungry.
Mm-hmm.
It's good.
Okay. So, our lesson today is not really, but is, the title is Isaac and Rebekah, but it's really not Isaac and Rebekah, it's really Jacob and Rebekah. Matter of fact, when I was doing the lesson, I was like, did I write that down wrong? Because, really doesn't have that much to do with Isaac. But anyways, the title of the lesson, I did not title it. And it is, we're still on family conflicts and family favorites. So, have a question for you before we get into the lesson. Who has a favorite child or was the favorite of the family?
I have a favorite, but I only have one.
I know, that's easy,
People.
She even had a shirt, I'm mom's favorite.
Yeah.
And you have two children, right? You have a son and daughter, Jeannie?
We do.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Okay, so I know you don't wanna say but as a matter of fact, the card this week, one of
Search for
them,
the seed.
and I'm sure Dorothy got a kick out of it because I put in parentheses, I said, I know it's Cheryl.
Actually, I think because of my mother-in-law, I made sure I did not play favorites because she had favorite grandchildren. And it was
What's wrong
so,
with that?
it was so obvious, you
Okay.
know, and, she had one in particular, and it was so obvious. And so, yeah, I was very careful not, and it was easier because it's a boy and a girl.
Yeah.
So if it was two girls, it would be, or two boys, it might have been a little bit difficult, but no. I didn't play favorites, even though you could ask them and they said I played favorites towards the other one.
Well, you know, it's funny that you said that because somebody that I work with was saying she has two daughters. And so one of the daughters, they're both grown. One of the daughters, there's been like some little strife, between her and this daughter. And so they went out and ate, and the daughter was saying, you take my sister's side all the time. And she said, how can you say that? She goes, well, whenever I'm talking to you about her, you shake your head yes. I go, because you're saying I hear you, you know? But that's not how she took it.
Yeah.
And so
That's
I
true
thought that,
though, because that's like my sister and I'm the youngest, but my sister and I, when we were growing up, I was the favorite, cause,
of course, you're the baby of the family.
but mom always took me back and always accepted me no matter my flaws,
Uh-huh.
and so did my dad. And my sister got angry, and I did not know she was mad until probably I'd say 7 years ago. Her and I finally talked, and she told me that she was angry. But my sister and I are like best friends, and she lives in Austin, and she calls me almost at least once a week. She'll text me, just say, hey sis, I just need you to know that I love you. And my sister's never ever done that, but now it's like, I guess we're both the favorites because we've both grown up, but I was always, because mom always took me no matter my flaws, she always took me back in my deepest times, she always did. So, and she was angry about that, but you don't realize that your siblings do get angry for that reason. So
I've always told my kids that my favorite is the one who needs me the most at the time, you know? And
oh well, dang, I'm in a
really-
lot of trouble then.
It really is kind of true. And I've always told them that I don't have any favorites, but I have a favorite thing about each one of you.
Right.
And I really do. I have every single one of their things that I love the most about them is so different from the other.
I love that.
There's a really cute movie out, it's called Boss Baby, and so this boy, he's in a home with his parents and everything's perfect, and then a baby comes into the home. And the baby is, anyway, it's really, really cute. It's on Netflix if you wanna watch it, but,
Even with my
kinda deals with
grandkids
that.
at this point, I say, you're my favorite 17-year-old granddaughter.
Uh-huh.
I make sure I put in that age.
Yes, exactly.
I can't do that, I have too many the same age. I don't.
Well, you could say, I'm just picking a month, you're my favorite 17-year-old born in January.
Brenna
Now, but if
says,
you got multiple ones
Brenna
same age.
says, I have to be your favorite because I'm the one that made you a grandma.
that's
I can see
cute.
Brenna saying that. I can see Brenna
Okay,
saying
so we are in Genesis, chapter 25 and chapter 27. This morning, I was made aware of, I hadn't really thought about this, but in chapter 21, Genesis 21, 4 chapters previously, is when Abram sacrifices Isaac. So you're not going very far until we're here. And so it's just amazing. Obviously, it doesn't have an indication of time, but that is just didn't take long biblical wise for us to be where we are today. So let's move on. And so we have some desserts here in your book. And our question is, kind of looks like Shipley's, although I don't think Shipley's looks that good. So what are some areas in your life where you definitely have favorites? So not talking about family members, but maybe you have like a favorite restaurant or a favorite song or a favorite
Movie.
vacation,
Mhm.
movie,
Friend?
okay,
Food?
food,
Mhm,
okay.
mhm.
What's your favorite food?
All of it.
I don't like Chinese, and I'm not that. I like my Italian, but I don't like Italian. So it's
My
like.
favorite song is God's, I just heard it on the way here. God's plan is what it is, cause you never know God's plan, so. And I blare it up and I'm all hands up in my car. People think I'm crazy, but that's okay. But
Good. Anyone else? Favorite? Okay. So maybe we can get our resident Bible meets lifer, Renee Haskins, to read for us about Jerry.
About Gary?
Jerry.
Jerry. Yeah, Gary, your brother. Yes, it's about her brother Gary. They misspelled the name.
The Bible meets life. Jerry is a 28-year-old guy who's a die-hard Miami Dolphin fan. He's been that way since he was 5. Not because Miami is his hometown, but because when he was 5, he loved dolphins. And when he saw the helmet, he was all in for life. He wouldn't dare be a Jets fan. He hates the Jets. That's just how our favorites work. Favorites make us human. We make binary choices as we get older. We might start out in neutral, but we never stay that way. Chocolate or vanilla, Ford or Chevy, Mac or PC, boxers or briefs. Favorites define who we are. But in families, favorites devastate. Favoritism weaves through the story of Jacob and Esau. The stage is set from the start. Mom and Dad, Isaac and Rebekah, both choose their pick of the litter. Isaac preferred Esau. Rebekah preferred Jacob. Each parent doted, conspired, and deceived to give their favorite son their upper hand. Your family of origin may have been like the family of Isaac and Rebekah. It may not have instilled positive practices, but families teach us some of our greatest lessons and reveal some of our greatest shortcomings. It is through our families we should learn how to love one another.
So maybe you're the favorite in your family, or maybe you had a sibling that was. Today, we're going to see how favoritism can cause conflict and irreconcilable differences. So the point of our lesson today is love should be without favoritism within the family. We know that God doesn't play favorites, right?
Yeah.
Because if he did, he would just have random people that he would choose. And John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, so that none should perish." He doesn't want that. So if he did play favorites, he'd be okay with some perishing, but he's not. So many of us have experienced favoritism in the workplace. We've seen someone being treated as the teacher's pet. Favoritism even happens in the church, unfortunately. It can be seen also in the family. While we give lip service to loving everyone equally, it's easy to show preference for the child, grandchild, or parent who shares the same interest, does what is expected, or even indicates favoritism towards you. Favoritism leads to dysfunction, but love should rule our hearts. So let's open up in prayer. Would somebody like to do that this morning? Jamie, you want to? Thank you.
Dear Lord Jesus, I just thank you for this day, Lord. I thank you for this beautiful weather you've given us. I thank you that you've brought all these ladies here, Lord, safely, Lord. I pray for Miss Terry as she gives us our lesson this morning, that she will touch something, or someone will get something from this lesson from Isaac and Rebekah, Lord. Lord, I just thank you for guiding us and directing us in the path that we're supposed to go, Lord. And Lord, I just thank you for everything you're gonna do and everything you will do. In your name I pray, amen.
Okay, so we're going to watch a little video that I found.
Our next story is from the book of Genesis, which is full of family drama. The drama of this story can be summed up in just a few words. Isaac loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. In this video, Claire explores faith and favoritism in the story of Rebekah.
One of the wonderful things I found when researching women of the Old Testament was how often these women faced issues that seemed so relevant and current. As a mum of 3 now strapping young men, I know what a joy and challenging parenting can be. Most parents start out wanting the very best for their children, but sometimes, perhaps all too often, we make mistakes and get it wrong. Rebekah is a good example of a woman who shows remarkable courage and faith in her life, but who also struggles in her parenting, and this leads to disaster. Abraham was an elderly patriarch and wanted to find a wife for his son Isaac from his own home country, rather than from Canaan, where they now lived. His estate manager is sent on a quest to find someone suitable, and after praying, he encounters the beautiful Rebekah by a well. She offered to water his camels, and he took this as a sign from God that she was the one. Lengthy negotiations with her father Bethuel take place, and Rebekah was asked if she was willing to leave her home to go to a foreign land to marry a stranger. She gave her consent with a simple, "I will go." She marries Isaac and eventually, after a difficult pregnancy, gives birth to twin boys, Esau and Jacob. Her boys were very different to one another. Esau was the rugged, outdoorsy hunter type, while Jacob was quieter and a more home-based type. Families are rarely simple and straightforward, and often jealousies and feuds and rivalries are formed early on. And this family was no exception, and perhaps it began here. Isaac loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. A recipe for disaster. Rebekah favoured Jacob. She disapproved of Esau's choice of wives, and then plotted to make sure that Jacob would gain his father's blessing over and above his slightly older twin. The fraternal feud lasted many years, and eventually meant that Rebekah's favourite son had to flee into exile. Jacob and Esau were eventually reconciled, but we don't know if Rebekah was still alive to witness this. Rebekah was a courageous and bold woman of faith. Her actions may have caused conflict and division within her family, but she was not afraid to take risks, to speak her mind, and she used the power that she had to secure what she wanted for those she loved.
Not all of us are siblings, but many of us will have felt jealousy or rivalry how do you think Jacob and Esau felt about their parents' favoritism?
I thought that was really, really good. Okay, so, the setting of where we're gonna be today. In Genesis 15, the Lord again reaffirmed his commitment to Abram. And let's forget to hit that. That's okay. In chapter 17, the Lord changed Abram's name to Abraham and initiated circumcision as a sign of the covenant. At 90 years of age, Sarah gave birth to the promised son Isaac. Chapter 22 records the near sacrifice of Isaac. Chapter 23 reports Sarah's death and burial. After Sarah's death, Abraham sent a trusted servant, as we saw in the video, back to family relatives to find a wife for Isaac. Rebekah willingly returned with the servant and became Isaac's wife. Chapter 24. Rebekah gave birth to twin sons, Jacob and Esau. And what's interesting, and I don't know if you caught this, is that when Rebekah was asked if she would go, she said, I will. That is the exact same words that Abram said whenever he left Ur of the Chaldees. And we are called to go. Each and every one of us is called to go. Maybe not to a foreign land, but to go and share the gospel message. So let's get to our scripture. And so our first set of scriptures, we're in chapter 25 of Genesis. And who would like to read verses 24 through 28 for us?
I can do it.
Thank you, Darlene.
And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob.
Thank you. So, as we've talked about already, saw in the video, Isaac and Rebekah played favorites with their twin sons. And you can imagine, as a father, we don't know how old Rebekah was, but he was 60 years old. And he probably thought, I'm never going to become a father. I would imagine. I know that we as women think that if it takes us longer to get pregnant than what we're planning on, and we think, I'm never going to be a parent. And so when that child comes, because I can remember feeling that way when I finally got pregnant with Brandon after several miscarriages. I thought, I'm never going to become a parent. So after he was born, I put all my time and attention into that one child. Till sister came along 5 years later. But I think that's a human nature, is especially whenever you think, I'm never going to achieve X, that we have a tendency to pour ourselves into whatever that X is, and then it can have consequences of those actions. But the question is that I was thinking about when working on this lesson is that what Rebekah did was wrong, but God still used her actions. It says in the book of Hebrews, Jacob, God saying this, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. That's very strong words. For God to hate somebody, but that's what the book of Hebrews says. Now, could it be because Esau was willing to sell his birthright for food, which is not part of this lesson? Or was it for God knew his heart? We don't know, but we don't see anywhere else in the Bible that God hates somebody, but that it's says he hated Esau. So, how did Isaac and Rebekah demonstrate favoritism? Isaac and Rebekah played favorites with their sons, and Genesis 27 highlights this dysfunction. Isaac had more in common with his son Esau. There's no harm in having more in common with one child, that's natural. But favoritism is a choice to punish by neglecting the other children. We've probably all been guilty, maybe if we have multiple children, of doing this. Sometimes we might have something, as in this situation, in common with one child over the other. Maybe because you have a son and a daughter, that it would be easier to relate to one over the other. Can be same-sex parent or opposite-sex parent. But for whatever reason that is, that we can have, we can see something in them that just draws us in, and then we can find ourselves possibly making an idol of that child because we're pouring all of our time and attention into them instead of the family as a whole. Maybe we can ignore our spouses over the child or children, and that also is a mistake to do. So we need to be careful about that. We cannot prove why Rebekah favored Jacob, but experience suggests that she may have simply favored him because her husband preferred Esau. Again, we don't know why, and maybe it was as simple as that. Maybe it was that Jacob liked hanging around with her in the tent. Maybe he was like, hey mom, let me help you clean, or what are you cooking? Teach me how to do that. And then you have the other child that really doesn't seem to want anything to do with you, and he's off pottering after his dad and wanting to learn about the flocks and the things that Isaac was doing. And so it would have probably maybe been a natural process, not maybe an overt process, but that, oh my goodness, this child is interested in what I'm doing. And so I'm going to teach them. And then it morphed into what we're seeing. So the following key words highlight the differences between Jacob and Esau. So it appears because if a child is born premature, and usually twins are, that baby will still have hair on it. It's part of the developmental process in the womb, and so most babies don't look that way because when they're born they are full term, so they're not going to have that. It's been shed in the womb. But evidently for some reason, maybe that Esau did not shed it, and he had red hair probably anyway, so this is why he had he was red looking. Isaac and Rebekah named their first twin Esau, and the Edomites, which were enemies of the Jews, came from Esau. Edom derives from a Hebrew word which is called red or ruddy, and the name is also associated with the red stew that Jacob gave Esau in exchange for Esau's birthright, and that was in verse 30. He came grasping Jacob Esau's heel. Jacob emerged from Rebekah's womb. I just think that's amazing. I can't even fathom that. But he had a hold of his brother's heel. And it appears that the two of them, and we know that there was some discord in the womb, but that's kind of hard to even comprehend, that evidently these twins, when she was carrying them, were going at each other. So this was not a friendly relationship between brothers. They were competitive with one another from probably fairly early on in the pregnancy. They're both fighting for space. It's just kind of hard to believe that. I've never heard of that in recent days. I'm sure it does happen, but that they didn't get along even in the womb. So the Hebrew verb conveys the basic idea of taking hold of. It sometimes has the violent connotation of seizing. The sense here is that of firmly gripping. The heel is used symbolically elsewhere in the Old Testament to indicate a trusted friend's deception, and this is in Psalm 41:9. Jesus quoted this verse when he predicted his betrayal, and we see this in John 13:18. The picture of Jacob at birth is that of his firmly latching onto Esau's heel in an attempt to supersede him and be born first. He's probably trying to drag him back in. Let me be first. Esau recognized the appropriateness of Jacob's name when he discovered that Jacob had stolen his blessing. And this is Genesis 27:36. So Jacob. The sound of the Hebrew word translated by Jacob is a play on the Hebrew word for heel and cheated. We see this in verse 36. The name derives from a verb meaning to take by the heel or to supplant. Jacob lived up to his name in his dealings with Esau and later on Laban, who would be his father-in-law. However, his name was changed to Israel in his later wrestling and prevailing with God. The name Israel can be interpreted to mean God prevails or God rules, and this is found in Genesis 32:28 through his encounter with the divine messenger. Jacob learned that we prevail with God by yielding to him. And so when you think about Jacob, and even though we're just focusing on these few verses about him, we see a lifetime of somebody that we would think, there is no way God can use him. No way. But guess what? God does. God does use him. And I guess if you want to look at the choices that God had between Jacob and Esau, maybe that Jacob appeared to be the easier choice, but his name meant trickster. And we see that throughout. And so we can be, we can receive knowledge and acknowledgement that God can use us no matter who we are and what we've done in the past. He still uses us. And the last word is loved. Like our English word, the Hebrew verb rendered love ranged in intensity from the Lord's infinite love for his people to the sensual appetites of a lazy glutton. The term can describe love between people, including father and son or husband and wife. It can also designate love for things, good and bad, such as Isaac's love for delicious food. We see this in 27 verse 4. A greedy individual's love for wealth, Ecclesiastes 5:10, which we know that Solomon said it didn't bring him any happiness. A love for God's commandments, this is in Psalms 119:47, and a love for evil, Psalm 52:3. The Hebrew term for in Genesis 25:28 differs from the word designating the Lord's covenant love for his people. In the case of Isaac and Rebekah, each strongly preferred one of their sons. Isaac favored Esau while Rebekah favored Jacob. Partiality for one child over another also characterized Abraham's relationship with Isaac and Jacob's relationship to Joseph. So having these things in common with our children is natural, but when common interests become favoritism, it causes damage to the entire family. So our next verses is, we are now in chapter 27, so if you want to advance there. And we're in verses 5 through 10. And if somebody would like to read those 5 verses for us. Kathy, you want to read them? Thanks.
27. And Rebekah heard when Isaac spake to Esau his son, and Esau went to the field to hunt for venison and to bring it. And Rebekah spake unto Jacob her son, saying, Behold, I heard thy father speak unto Esau thy brother, saying, Bring me venison and make me savory meat, that I may eat, and bless thee before the Lord before my death. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice according to that which I command thee. Go now to the flock, and fetch me from thence 2 good kids of the goats, and I will make them savory meat for thy father, such as he loveth. and thou shalt bring it to thy father, that he may eat, and that he may bless thee before his death.
So this is a strange situation. Is that Isaac is old, and it says his eyes were so weak that he couldn't see. So whenever you lose a sense, your other senses pick up on that. The thing that's strange to me is this whole goat thing. Because the goat would not taste like wild meat. So your taste buds should have picked up where your vision left off. And so Rebekah thinks, rightfully so, that hey, we can do this and pull the wool over his eyes. And so that's exactly what happens here. So Rebekah sought to pull Jacob into her plan and deceive her husband. So when Isaac promised that he would give Esau his blessing, Rebekah was listening and plotted to trick her husband into giving his blessing to Jacob. With meticulous cunning, she devised an unthinkable scheme for a mother to commit. She betrayed both her husband and her firstborn. So a little bit further on, well, I think it's further on. Yes, with whenever we see that Joseph is sold into slavery, and so whenever the blessing comes for his two sons, the father puts, instead of oldest to youngest, does youngest to oldest. And so Joseph tries to say, you're doing it wrong, Dad. No, I am doing it right. And so I guess we can ask ourselves that, was Rebekah wrong in what she did? We see that the blessing really needed to go, according to the Bible, to Jacob. And so not to Esau. And Esau previously had sold his birthright, and it appears that Rebekah knew about it. Doesn't say it, but appears that she did. And so was this part of God's plan? Yes, it was. It was part of God's plan. Sometimes, God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And so it's kind of hard to wrap our minds around deception and how God could use it. But, deception is part of Jacob's life. It continues on from the porridge situation, or the stew, to most of his life. And as we saw in the video, can you imagine you're the mother, you favor this son, and because of what happens, Jacob has to flee for his life from Esau. He's scared to death that Esau's going to kill him. And you might never see him again. Not like you can pick up the phone and say, hey, miss you, how are you doing? She probably never saw him again. So she paid a price. She paid a very high price for her part in this situation. So it was Rebekah's idea to get 2 choice young goats so she could prepare Isaac one of his favorite meals. Maybe it had so many spices and sauces in it that he couldn't tell the difference. We don't know. We just know that he did not pick up on it. He did pick up on something, it just wasn't the food. It was her idea for Jacob to impersonate Esau and lie to the father about his identity. So what she did is they took the goat skins, put it on his arms so he would appear hairy, because Jacob's skin was smooth and Esau's was a very hairy man. And so it's still strange because our touch is very perfecting. And so we might not can see the difference, but you can feel the difference. But still, the voice being different, the hairiness being different, but he still bought into it. So it just makes you wonder how this happened, other than the only thing that we can say is that this was God's plan. Because everything points to mistake, 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 but it's not. So receiving his father's blessing was a crucial part to Esau's identity as the firstborn son. To lose this blessing was on par with being cursed. And I found that amazing, is that Esau was receiving a curse, because the opposite of blessing is the curse. So our key words, as you see up here, show that Rebekah was responsible for the deception that took place. So the first time she says listening in verse 5. That Rebekah heard the conversation between Isaac and Esau suggests that she was preparing to come to Jacob's aid in inquiring the blessing from his father. Observe that in verse 5 identifies Esau as his, Isaac's son, while verse 6 describes Jacob as her, Rebekah's son. You know, sometimes, this happens in my family, I don't know if it does in yours or not, is that if one of your children does something wrong, and so you're talking to your spouse and you go, your son or your daughter did X. We do it with our dogs now. Murray has a dog and I have a dog. And so we'll say, guess what your dog did?
Yeah.
Or, if something happens that somebody doesn't want to take ownership of, aka Murray, he'll blame the dog. The dog opened up the refrigerator and took some. It's amazing. We have amazing dogs. So parental favoritism with this attending conflict becomes clearly evident. After listening, so she's eavesdropping, Rebekah took action to ensure Jacob received the blessing of the firstborn in the household. While Esau was away hunting game, Rebekah felt free to manipulate the situation in her son's favor. The same verb appears in 27:8 in the form of a command. There the term means obey. Rebekah emphasized the need for Jacob to follow her instructions by paralleling the expressions, listen to me and do what I tell you. We don't know how old the boys were whenever this happened. They probably, I would imagine, because Isaac was 60 when the boys were born, that he probably was between 80 and 90, is a guess. And that was when his vision, he had become blinded. He couldn't see anymore. And so the boys were between 20 and 30 years old. So they probably weren't young, like 10 years old, 12 years old. They probably were a lot older than that, and they're still at home, and they're both being heavily influenced by the preferring parent. So listen, this is verse 6. This term literally means behold or look. It is an expression that demands attention. It emphasizes the information that follows. Bless you, this is verse 7. Blessing someone in the Old Testament meant endowing that person with power for prosperity, suggests longevity and fruitfulness. It also meant more than that. Is because of being a Jew or a Jewish person, that you are passing on from yourself to that child the ability to not only be the head of that household, but to perpetuate still the covenant blessing that God set up between him and Abram. Whenever Abram was asleep and God walked through those animals that were cut in half. So that was part of the blessing. So this blessing held huge significance, more than we can even begin to understand, because we don't see that in today's world. But it was huge back then. A father typically conveyed the patriarchal blessing of his oldest son. Because Esau had emerged from the womb first, before his twin, he was regarded as the elder son who would receive the blessing. The blessing was closely linked with the birthright that also belonged to the firstborn male child. The privileges associated with the birthright included a double portion of the inheritance, and the Hebrew word for blessing, which is Rebekah, is almost an anagram for the word meaning of both birthright and firstborn, which is Bekorah. So those words are very similar. And the choice of a young goat, verse 9, or goats, because it was 2. Rebekah designated her preparation of choice young goats to provide a tender delicacy to win Isaac's favor. The goat in the biblical era probably possessed a backward curving horns and long ears, serving as a prominent source of food. The goat also was used as a sacrifice. People utilized goat skins in making clothing, musical instruments, and water bottles. So not only can favoritism have an adverse effect on children, but it can also lead parents to make irrational and ungodly decisions. So in your book on page 111, we have Digging Deeper. Would somebody like to read that for us?
I will.
Thank you, Jean.
Birthright and blessing in Genesis. Birthright referred to special privileges that belonged to the firstborn male child in a family. Prominent among those privileges was a double portion of the estate as an inheritance. If a man had 2 sons, his estate would be divided into 3 portions, and the older son would receive 2. The oldest son also normally received the father's major blessing. Esau forfeited his birthright to his brother Jacob for the sake of a meal of lentil stew and bread. Genesis 25:29 through 34. Indeed, the Hebrew word for blessing, barakah, is virtually an anagram of the word that means birthright and firstborn. Bekorah, legal continuation of the family line, may also have been included among the privileges of the firstborn son. Deuteronomy 21 verses 15 through 17. Deuteronomy prohibited a father from playing favorites among his sons by trying to give the birthright to other than the first son. The blessing given by a clan patriarch is his heir was of great significance, since it was formally conferred the right to rule over the clan following the patriarch's death. The oldest son in particular received a special blessing. Jacob tricked his aged father, Isaac, into blessing him with the blessing that would normally have gone to Jacob's older brother, Esau. Isaac's blessing of his son Jacob was not irrevocable because it had already been uttered in Genesis 27:30 through 40, but because it had clearly been ordained by God in Genesis 25:22 through 23, and Isaac's preference for his son Esau could not change that.
Thank you. So isn't it strange, because we know Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, and Moses knew what had happened with Joseph, that Joseph's sons had received the blessing not in birthright order. But yet in Deuteronomy 21 it says it has to go to the firstborn. So that seems to contradict what happened not only in this situation, even though it was, I guess you could say, wrong, but that that was the way that it worked out with Joseph's 2 sons. So let's look at Genesis 27, our last set of verses. Thank you, Jean, for reading that for us. And look at what happens in verses 11 through 13. Who would like to read those for us? Thank you, Mary.
Jacob answered Rebekah's mother, "Look, my brother Esau is hairy and but I am a man of smooth skin. Suppose my father touches me, then I will be revealed to him as a deceiver and bring a curse rather than a blessing on myself." His mother said to him,
your curse won't be on me, my son, disobey me and go get them from me.
Wow. So she's willing to take full ownership for what she's putting her son up to. Those are heavy words. Those words are not something to be taken lightly. That she's willing to die. That's what she's saying. I'm willing to die to trick your dad into doing this. That's big.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably some of the heaviest words in the Old Testament, that she's like, let the curse be on me. Because no one would want to willingly be cursed. But she's willing to take ownership for it. So on pages 113 through 114 in your book, it shows favoritism towards a child may be perceived by the parent as love, but is actually irrational and harmful. Having a favorite child as encouraging them to do something wrong is a failure to love that child. It enables them to fall deeper into the consequences of sin. A lot of times, especially in today's world, we might not see it to this extent, but what we'll see is like omission from the parent. That parent will sit back and instead of lovingly guiding their children to make good life choices, they will throw their hands up and go, I don't know what to do, and refuse to guide them. And so it's just as devastating as encouraging the child to do something wrong, because their minds are not formed enough to make good choices and decisions. And a lot of times you'll see parents that will say, well, let a child, even a toddler, rule the house, make decisions, which are very, very dangerous, not only for that child, but for the entire family as a whole. It is never right to do wrong. Even though Rebekah was willing to assume responsibility, she could not protect Jacob from his consequences. And I'm going to tell you, the most of what we deal with and where I work is parents refusing to parent. And they'll call you, begging you for help, and you give them advice and they're not interested in it. I don't know what they want. It's like, why are you doing
They want you to fix it.
Yeah, well, and you give them advice on how to fix it.
They expect you to do it.
I guess they wanted me to get in my car, drive to their house.
Yes,
and-
they want the teachers to fix everything that their discipline should be.
Right,
They wanna be their kid's friend, not their
Yeah.
friend.
that's right, exactly. And you know, parenting's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do. There's a lot of hard choices and decisions, and it would be a lot easier to just throw up your hands and go, I give up, I don't know what to do, you know what, just go do whatever you want to do. But that's not loving your child. That's letting your child.
My kids used to tell me, well, I don't like you, I don't love you. Fine, if that's the way you feel, I know I don't particularly like you either. You're still gonna do what you have to do.
That's right.
Being a parent.
That's right.
I tell my daughter, if your kids love you and like you and they never don't like you, then you're not doing it right.
Exactly.
Because they're not gonna nobody likes instruction.
Nobody likes to be told no.
Even as but they really do like, borders and boundaries. They don't know they do, but they do.
Even as adults,
Yeah.
we might say we don't like boundaries, but you feel safer. You really do.
Yeah.
Because when you think about there not being boundaries, no laws, then you have chaos and anarchy, and so that doesn't make you feel safe. It makes you feel, I don't wanna go outside my house because I don't know what's gonna happen once I leave my house.
And my 3 sons, they'll still come up to me and say, Mom, I'm so glad you made me do this when I was younger. I'm so glad you drugged me to church, and all that, and I'm glad I am. But the weird thing about it is they raise their kids so different than what I had to raise mine,
Yep.
So different.
Yep. So Jacob's only concern was how to eliminate the obstacle that might keep him from pleading the fraud his arms were not hairy enough. So consider the fallout caused by the parental favoritism of Isaac and Rebekah. A husband and wife know they cannot trust each other for the rest of their days. Wow.
So did they ever get divorced?
I don't think they allowed that back then. I think you killed off the spouse. The certificate of divorce did not happen until further in the Bible, so we don't.
You killed off the spouse?
I'm being facetious.
Sweet, I need to go back to old days. Just kidding.
So the twin brothers
Papa said I could do
were
that.
forever enemies. Rebekah lost both of her sons in this process. Esau lost all his trust in her. He could not go to his mother ever again and think, my mom's gonna have my back. Wow, can you imagine that?
I wonder how old she was when she had them.
I think she was probably young.
Younger,
I think she was
yeah.
probably in her late teens, early 20s. I don't know. That's just my opinion. And Jacob will run away for fear of his life. Rebekah's favoritism ripped apart her entire family. Rebekah and Jacob were complicit in the deception in verses 11 through 13 through the following phrases. Knowing the difference that he was not a hairy man. He had smooth skin. But that she had an answer. That shows that she thought this out. This was not something that just popped up at the last minute, but she had evidently been devising a way for this to happen. Because I think that just shows either she was brilliant or she had been thinking about it. And so isn't that the difference between, like, if somebody's charged with murder, did they think about it, or was it just a result of an action? Because that's the difference in those two things. Am I gonna sit there and contemplate it and work it out in my mind how I'm gonna be able to do it? Or is it maybe like a defense thing? So that's what was going on here. And he brings up the fact, what if my dad touches me? He's gonna know immediately. And like I talked about the other senses, it seems strange to me, but it appears that I think we have to say that even though this is hard to stomach and hard to understand, this was all part of God's plan. Doesn't make it right, but I'm just saying he used it because God uses everything for his purposes. And she says, obey me, which means hearken to my voice or listen to me. And Rebekah's literal instructions to Jacob remind of a mother's often repeated directive when she says, when we say to our children, listen to me, better be careful, which meant she clearly intended for me to obey what she was about to say. So family favoritism in ancient times is still around today with even the same consequences. It might not be the difference between blessing and cursing, but it still has the same destructive properties. So what do we do with what we have just learned? It was a lot to stomach today, was it not? A lot to think about. This isn't just like look, it's a cute little Bible story and I'm going to teach it to my little kids. A little bit more than that. So what we can do in response to this is read 1 Corinthians 13 because it provides a template for love and respect in families. We can reflect. Maybe you can reflect on times you have been wounded as another family member being a favorite, or maybe you played a favorite. We probably, if not most of us, all of us have probably been guilty of this at one point in time or another, of favoring a child over another. Maybe even it wasn't even our own child. Maybe it was a niece or a nephew or something like that, but we still played favorites. Seek to rectify favoritism in your own life. James 2, verses 1, 3, and 9 can help us with this. If you think you've been guilty of showing favoritism in your family, set aside time to have a conversation with the family members who you have harmed through favoritism. Ouch. I don't know if we wanna sign up for that, but that's what it says we should do. Yes, Darlene?
I was gonna say, I was kind of, I was listening to Jody about, sometimes it's the one you need. Well, it doesn't appear that way to the other kids, you know. It doesn't always appear that way. But sometimes you have to keep them from doing worse stuff. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a stopping place, you know. And it may seem like favoritism, but you know, nobody gave instructions when they made us moms. I mean, you know,
Right.
we had to figure it
Well,
out.
I battle a lot, with my siblings about being the favorite, because, you know, my parents and I lived together.
Yeah, but you're
And-
closer to them, so they have to understand
Well,
that
and-
too.
And so I battle that, and I battle it with, you know, a relationship is a two-way street.
Yep.
And it is with God too. I mean, if you see your neighbor getting more blessings, then maybe it's because they're more open to receiving more blessings. And so I battle that with my siblings on, well, I encourage you to call them, ask them, talk to them, get to know them. There's a lot of things they don't even know about my parents, but that's not because of my parents. That's because of, you know, so.
That's a
that-
difficult situation.
It's a hard situation, but I just, I don't let it bother me. I know I'm the favorite, it's okay. Actually, my mother doesn't have any favorites, and I was thinking about this today because, I think of any person I have ever known in my entire life, my mother probably has the most godlike love I have ever seen, because she has been so abused by some of her children and has never turned her back. And she has such an unconditional love that none that I've ever seen, because I would have gave up on them a long time ago. And they've even given up on each other. They fight so bad amongst themselves. And I can talk to all of them, but they don't talk to any of them. They don't talk to each other, but they all talk to me about each other. And so it's really a difficult situation, but I honestly, if I can grow up to be half the person that my mother is in forgiving and loving, then I think I'm gonna be okay.
But you know, you can also make your child or children feel like each one is your favorite.
Oh, yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. That's being even. And so if I brought all three of my kids in here at one at a time, they would each tell you that they're my favorite. Brandon says it all the time. He goes, I know I'm your favorite. Okay, Brandon.
I try to make mine feel the same way about each other, because Corey is my oldest, and when I had Courtney brought gifts to Corey. We brought things and said, this is from your baby sister, so he wouldn't be jealous of her. And so we kind of all started out on an even level. And they're very different. They're boy and a girl. Corey's very of doing whatever, and Courtney's very follows the rules. But I love both of them, and they both know that, and they're just different.
Yes, and it's just so strange whenever you look at family dynamics and that you can have children that are raised exactly the same, but they all turn out completely different.
Oh, yes.
So I hope that you learned a lot from this lesson, more than maybe you were aware of that you knew or thought about, and about the devastating consequences that when we do play favorites that can cause. Or maybe we've been at the receiving end of not feeling like we were somebody's favorite and how that made us feel. And so I hope that you have some good takeaways from this lesson. So we're gonna go ahead and close out in prayer because we have 1 minute till church is starting.
It's fine, but before we go, we need to pray for this election, y'all. I'm working it.